Dear friends, in this course on social welfare and social legislations, we are going to look at in this chapter on social legislations and constitutional provisions in favor of Dalits. A social practice that has developed in Indian society over the years is untouchability. The victims of this undesirable system are a group known variously as untouchables, depressed classes, Harijans, Dalits, and scheduled castes. They constitute around 1/6 of the population in India and have historically been subjected to several social, educational, financial, and cultural disabilities. The caste system, which confined an individual's occupation to that of the caste he was born into, ensured that the persons from the scheduled castes remained in menial jobs, and particularly those menial jobs which were considered polluting according to the caste system. This pollution was used as an excuse to exclude the scheduled castes from various aspects of social existence. The scheduled castes were for long not allowed entry into public temples, excluded from accessing public utilities such as tanks, wells, bathing ghats, etc. They were excluded from schooling, and formal education was denied to them for long. In several parts of India, they were prohibited from owning land. They were therefore denied equal opportunity for development. The official identification of scheduled castes is through presidential notification as per Article 341 of the Constitution of India. The President may, by notification, determine the list of all scheduled castes in a given state. The values embodied in the Constitution, even in the preamble, point towards the goal of securing a more equitable society for the Dalits, in that it enumerates justice, social, economic, and political as a fundamental goal. The chapter on fundamental rights in the Constitution is known as the cornerstone of our legal system. The provisions that we may find in this chapter in favor of the scheduled castes are probably the greatest effort at ensuring a more equitable position in society for the scheduled castes. The first and foremost clause that provides for some benefits to the scheduled castes would be Article 14 of the Constitution. This article provides that everyone is equal before the law and everyone shall be accorded equal protection of the law. This means that not only will the law look at everyone equally, but it is also important to ensure that everyone is put in such a position as to get equal protection of the law. This latter requirement of ensuring equal protection of the law has been interpreted as a direction to treat unequals unequally, and that some special positive discrimination might be necessary in favor of scheduled classes who have been historically left out of the development process. Article 15 of the Constitution provides for non-discrimination by the state. Here, an important amendment has been brought about to allow the state to make special provisions for scheduled castes. Article 16 of the Constitution provides for non-discrimination in matters of employment in public services. An amendment that was brought about pretty early in our constitutional history provides here the opportunity for the state to make special provisions for scheduled castes. Subsequent amendments have extended the scope of the provision here to include promotion and later consequential seniority also. Article 17 provides for the prohibition of the practice of untouchability. This article is probably the one provision which directly attacks the core of the injustice that was being meted out to the Dalits under the traditional system. Article 25 of the Constitution is another provision that is worth noting over here. While the main concern of this provision is towards providing for the freedom to continue religious practices, it is the exception that has been introduced into this provision that is of interest to us currently. The exception provides that notwithstanding the freedom to practice religion, the government reserves the right to carry out reform. It further provides that Hindu temples are to be thrown open to all classes and sections of Hindus. The next provision is Article 46, which is part of the chapter on directive principles on state policy. This provision directs the state to provide for the educational and economic welfare of the scheduled caste. The next important constitutional provision that operates in favor of the scheduled castes is Article 330, which provides for the reservation of seats for scheduled castes in the House of People. The 73rd and 74th Amendments have brought about a veritable revolution in the sphere of local self-government. The chapters that have been added to the Constitution under these amendments make it mandatory to constitute Panchayati Raj institutions at the village, block and district level. Article 243D and Article 243T provide for the reservation of seats for the scheduled castes in the rural areas, in the rural areas panchayats and municipalities respectively. This reservation is to be so as to ensure that the number of directly elected representatives are of the same proportion as the percentage of scheduled castes in the general populace of the area. Article 338 of the Constitution is particularly important for the scheduled castes. This provision provides for the establishment of a scheduled caste commission. The duties of the scheduled caste commission are as follows: A. To investigate and monitor all matters relating to the safeguards provided for the scheduled castes under this Constitution or under any other law for the time being in force or under any order of the government, and to evaluate the working of such safeguards. B. To inquire into specific complaints with respect to the deprivation of rights and safeguards of the scheduled castes. Third, to participate and advise on the planning process of socio-economic development of the scheduled castes and to evaluate the progress of their development under the Union and any state. Fourthly, to present to the President annually and at such other times as the Commission may deem fit reports upon the working of those safeguards. Fifthly, to make in such reports recommendations as to the measures that should be taken by the Union or any state for the effective implementation of those safeguards and other measures for the protection, welfare and socio-economic development of the scheduled castes, and to discharge such other functions in relation to the protection, welfare and development and advancement of the scheduled castes as the President may, subject to the provisions of any law made by Parliament, by rule specify. Further, to make in such reports recommendations as to the measures that should be taken by the Union or any state for the effective implementation of those safeguards and other measures for the protection, welfare and socio-economic development of the scheduled castes, and further to discharge such other functions in relation to the protection, welfare and development and advancement of the scheduled caste as the President may, subject to the provisions of any law made by Parliament, by rule specify. The above stated provisions and the mandate of the Commission on Scheduled Castes were the key provisions which are existing in the Constitution of India to deal with the menace of untouchability and provide a level playing field to the members of these castes who have been historically unjustly treated. However, apart from the Constitution, there are several legislation which protect the interests of the Dalits. Foremost amongst them is the Protection of Civil Rights Act. The Protection of Civil Rights Act is the enabling legislation for Article 17 of the Constitution of India. Article 17 of the Constitution of India abolishes untouchability. However, the nitty-gritties and the legislative provisions which actually bring into action are contained in the Protection of Civil Rights Act. This statute was initially called the Untouchability Offences Act, and today it seeks to impose sanctions against the practice of untouchability. Section 3 of the legislation provides for punishment of persons who prevent another of the same religion from entering into any place of public worship which is open to other persons professing the same religion on the grounds of untouchability. The same provision also makes it a punishable offence to prevent from worshipping or offering prayers or performing any religious service in any place of public worship, or bathing in or using the waters of any sacred tank, well, spring or watercourse, such as a river or lake, or bathing at any ghat of such tank, watercourse, river or lake, in the same manner and to the same extent as is permissible to the other persons professing the same religion. It may be noted that this statute derives its strength and direction from Article 15 of the Constitution, which provides that no citizen shall be on the grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them be subject to any disability, liability, restriction or condition with regard to a. access to shops, public restaurants, hotels and places of public entertainment, or the use of wells, tanks, bathing ghats, roads and places of public resort maintained wholly or partly out of state funds or dedicated to the use of the general public. This source of inspiration is apparent in sections 4, 5, 6 and 7 of the Protection of Civil Rights Act, which operationalizes the ideal expressed in the aforementioned constitutional clause by attaching to it a sanction by way of imprisonment and fine. An amendment has been introduced to this legislation to include unlawful compulsory labor within the meaning of untouchability. This legislation, while necessary, was found to be not sufficient to appropriately redress the gamut of disabilities faced by the Dalits in everyday life. Taking note that atrocities against scheduled castes were rampant and that Dalits found it difficult to navigate the regular legal system in an atmosphere of oppression, a special legislation making special punishments and setting up special courts for the trial of atrocities against Dalits was brought. Some of the offences which this legislation seeks to punish are: first, compelling Dalits to eat or drink obnoxious substances; second, parading members of the scheduled caste naked; third, insulting or intimidating a member of the scheduled caste with a view to humiliate him in public, etc. Several other acts which are offences within the scope of the Indian Penal Code are given an enhanced punishment under this Act, which is called the Prevention of Atrocities Act. This legislation also provides for the setting up of special courts to try offences under the Prevention of Atrocities Act. We have looked at some of the important nationwide legislations. The efforts taken by the governments at the central and state level towards the upliftment of the scheduled castes can be seen in myriad social welfare legislations. Social justice ministries at the central and state level coordinate several schemes and welfare programs to ensure upliftment of Dalits. We will look at them in greater detail later, but right now we would try and see a few of them. The first is the Rajiv Gandhi National Fellowship. This is for encouraging Dalit scholars to take up advanced studies such as MPhil and PhD. Then there are matrix scholarships given to encourage and make sure that Dalit scholars, Dalit children can continue with their education. After this, there is the Babu Jagjeevan Ram Chhatravas Yojana, which provides hosteling facilities to Dalit scholars. Other than this, there are various self-employment schemes. Furthermore, there are scholarships for pursuing education at an overseas level. Furthermore, free coaching is provided to various Dalit students to make sure that they can compete in competitive examinations. Further, a deliberate positive discrimination in favor of scheduled castes may be seen in the design of several social welfare policies, such as NREGA, which is the National Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which provides that a certain percentage of the beneficiaries of the Act must necessarily be members of the scheduled caste. Rules for financial inclusion are often made keeping in mind the special requirement of the scheduled castes, and they are designated as priority sector borrowers from the banks. The state governments across the country have taken several steps to improve the lot of the scheduled castes. The states which have taken bold land reform measures have sought to redistribute land, and this has important implications in the upliftment of the depressed classes. The challenges before the scheduled castes in India are, however, still huge and indeed manifold. The scheduled castes are behind the rest of the society in most social and developmental indicators, which tells us that probably the day is still far away where we can claim to have completely erased the disabilities faced by such a large segment of our society. The figures regarding crimes and atrocities against scheduled castes charged under the Prevention of Atrocities Act mentioned before paint a sorry picture about the state of affairs in large parts of the country. They also probably indicate that there is some level of animosity still harbored amongst the other castes towards the Dalit, which may stem from a misplaced sense of superiority according to the rigors of the old caste order, or from a desire to put down assertions of their rights by Dalits. The question which we as Indians and as citizens of a modern nation need to ask ourselves is, does it make sense to continue recognizing arbitrary caste boundaries? Does it make sense to exclude any section of the population from access to basic civic amenities? Far more importantly, is it not in the best interest of the country that those people who have been left out in the developmental process, not for a few years, not for a few decades, but for millennia, be brought back into the mainstream of society? No person seriously concerned with the growth and development of the nation would doubt the veracity and the appropriateness of steps taken to improve the lot of Dalits and of Dalits or the scheduled castes. Then what is it that prevents the proper implementation of these programs? What is it that makes violence against Dalits a continued and very present reality? It is the mindsets of the yesteryears. Sometimes it is thinking about the immediate smaller interests over the larger interests of the nation and society as a whole, which bring about these issues between scheduled castes and other castes. It remains a bitter reality that scheduled castes still find it difficult to make a meaningful life for themselves. While it may not be doubted that the affirmative action programs of the government have vastly helped the scheduled castes and other backward sections of the society, it still remains to be, it needs to be asserted that the problem faced by these sections was not a problem merely of economic dimension. It was, in absolute terms, a problem of total deprivation, a problem in which the scheduled castes were denied choice, a problem in which these sections were denied having a say in their own lives. The problems were having their lives controlled by arcane rules of the caste system, which might have been made entirely to benefit some sections of the society. While the legislations, schemes and programs may have been effective to an extent in bettering the lives of the members of the scheduled castes, it needs to be added that only these will be grossly insufficient for attaining our goal of social justice. There is a desperate need of societal change. There is a desperate need of mental change. There is a desperate need to change the societal attitudes. This is necessary if we are to realize our true potential as a nation, and we will go a long way in forging a national identity that overrides the artificial identities created by castes. Thus, to conclude, we can say, while a plethora of steps have been taken constitutionally and through legislations to improve the lot of the scheduled castes, much more still needs to be done. What needs to change is a societal attitude. What needs to change is the way a man looks at another. What needs to change is the term caste, which creeps into between an individual and another.